Reilly Davidson. I had the pleasure of co-curating a show with Adam of Nick's images. It's now on view, Manada Building, on 311 East Broadway.
Yes,
Manada
East Broadway is the initial name of the space.
Perfect. And I would love to intro our panelists. I'm going to read off my phone. Adam Abdalla is the president of Cultural Counsel and has been a leading communications and marketing executive for over 16 years, collaborating with such companies as A24, Netflix, Magnolia Pictures, and United Talent Agency. He has a unique cross-section of experience between the worlds of entertainment and professional wrestling. He's also the founder and publisher of the annual journal, Orange Crush, the Journal of Art Wrestling, which has been covered by CNN, Monocle, New York Magazine, and the New York Times. Nick Karp is a photographer specializing in documentary, event, and portraiture. Karp's work has been profiled in Korakuen and Sports Illustrated. Additionally, his bylines include Rolling Stone, Vice, Cream, and Alternative Press. In 2020, Nick released the photo zine Death and COVID via Orange Crush, a photographic exploration of the independent deathmatch wrestling scene. Death and COVID chronicles the fighters, fans, and failures of a rare performance art scrapping during the pre-vaccine era of the pandemic. Masha Slamovich is a professional wrestler. She is currently signed to Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, where she's a two-time TNA Knockouts World Tag Team Championship. She also makes appearances on the independent circuit and for Game Changer Wrestling, where she's the current JCW World Champion in her first reign. Masha is also heavily featured in Visitors, the recently released photo book documenting the 3-day wrestling event organized by Game Changer Wrestling and initiated by Adam, who brought Nick on to photograph the whole thing. Again, the photos are on view on East Broadway. We put that together last week, and it's on view till May 5th. Adam, your magazine, Orange Crush, is a perfect touchstone for this tether between art and wrestling. How did you get it started, and how do you see it functioning?
Yeah, so hi everybody, thank you for coming out. I've been a fan of professional wrestling since 1990, so since I was 5 years old. I think most people, not everybody, but most people who are really into wrestling start when they're kids, and then, kind of through Arrested Development or other afflictions, kind of stick with it their entire life and, get really into it. And I've always been a fan. As I started becoming more successful in my career, I tried to just support independent wrestling through little sponsorships and things like that, because these guys put in so much effort and give their bodies and mind to the sport, and it's hard. And eventually, I thought about how can I contribute to the dialogue in a significant way. How can I take what I do every day and combine that with something that I was passionate about. So I came up with the concept of putting together essentially almost like hybrid lifestyle magazine, art magazine about professional wrestling in the contemporary art space, which I was really familiar. So we did 3 annual journals. It was a combination of commissioning original photography from folks who were within the subculture, like Nick, who really had a great eye and an amazing archive of photos related to different topics that we were interested in. And then also interviewing and putting an emphasis on major contemporary artists that have dealt with the subject matter. So I interviewed people like Raymond Pettibon, who has been a major wrestling fan since the 1970s in LA in the Olympic Auditorium. Actually, there's a very famous professional wrestler who got hit by a bus in New York City 4 days ago, and the next day he went to a Broadway show with Ray. So, he's still pretty close to the sport. Also people like Sean Leonardo, who had an entire project where he donned a lucha libre mask and became a trained professional wrestler, and turned that into a long-term photo project, actually wrestling circuits in Mexico. People like Rosalind Drexler, who was actually a women's professional wrestler in the 1950s, around the time of Mildred Burke, who then went on to become a story painter with Garth Green Gallery. There's a lot of overlap between wrestling and art, and we kind of investigated a lot of that in the magazine. So that was kind of the predecessor to this new book, which is here, Visitors, that I put together with Nick. But prior to that, Reilly, you mentioned in Nick's bio Death and COVID, a zine that we did together. So originally, Nick and I had an idea for a book that was similar to this, but didn't come together. There's a place in Mexico, about 45 minutes outside of Mexico City, called the Junkyard, where they do death matches in like an active junkyard in Mexico. And there's like dogs and cats and little kids running around, and people jumping off cars and people breaking glass. And we're like, wouldn't that be cool to go into like kind of like a slice of life like documentary photo zine about this? So we bought our tickets, we're getting ready to go, and then COVID hit, so it never happened. So I holed up in my apartment for a year, and Nick did something else. So Nick, why don't you talk about what you ended up doing?
So 2020, I'm an event photographer for money. Like that's how I pay my rent. And March 15th, all my jobs canceled. So I was stuck in my home for a little bit. And I think June or late May was when the first independent wrestling show I saw was happening in the midst of the COVID pandemic. So May 2020, which is insane to think about. And I'm lucky enough where my roommates were not immunocompromised. One was continuing working in the pandemic, the other was working from home, but whatever. And I was granted access at the time to a show at outdoors in Atlantic City for a company called ICW. And
I was there too.
you were there? I didn't even know.
The parking lot?
Yeah. Yeah, this was before, this was like, I think like the week before we solidified what I was gonna do.
Yeah.
Because I shot that and I realized, oh, there's more wrestling happening in June of 2020 and July 2020. And in the midst of a global pandemic, this art form there was only 2 performance arts still really happening. It was deathmatch wrestling and drag. And I leaned towards the deathmatch wrestling side of it because in a time where people were afraid of a virus, they were going through glass and barbed wire. And I thought that was a really interesting juxtaposition of what life was. And I got to travel for this book to places like Indiana, Florida, I mean, I say Jersey, but like some of the places in Jersey feel foreign.
Yeah. But places without regulations, really.
Yeah, it was literally places where COVID was not taken as seriously as New York took it. And I documented the scene that was still happening. It was.
Did you get COVID?
Not till after, like not till Omicron. And like in all fairness, when I did get Omicron, I was out that day and I'm like, this is when I'm gonna get it. Like, I knew it. It was just where I was. I'm like, yeah, if I get it, it's gonna be now. And lo and behold, that's when I got it. That's the only time I got it though.
I got it at a Knicks game.
That told me to laugh. It's not funny.
But yeah, so Nick put together this amazing zine called Death and COVID. We did about around 300. It sold out. A lot of people loved it. A lot of people hated it because of the fact that they thought we were celebrating something that was like totally irresponsible.
I'm also
Yes, go on.
Yeah, I'm also a believer that like not all art is supposed to make you feel comfortable, clearly, and like the name Death and COVID kind of implied that. Like,
yeah, there's a lot of concerned trolls on Twitter, like who were trying to like get us canceled at the time, but
whatever.
Wrestling's separated from my real job most of the time, so it wasn't that big a deal. So that's how we kind of started working together more formally on books.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the deathmatch wrestling, and you, of course, are a participant, so can you get a little bit of insight into what that style, what that looks like?
Yeah, explain what deathmatch wrestling is to the nascent audience.
Well, sometimes I don't really know where to begin with this, but deathmatch wrestling is kind of the epitome of violence within our sport. I remember being a fan, much like Adam, when I was a young child, and I always was looking up how much more extreme can we get? We can use chairs and tables and ladders, and then I discovered deathmatch wrestling where we use fluorescent light bulbs and panes of glass and barbed wire and knives and pizza cutters and fire. And I found that to be very amusing and very freeing, because when you get into that environment, it's like everything is so extremely in focus. You can almost feel the crispness in the air, and you can smell the blood in the air, and just having all of those elements around you, hearing the glass like breaking under your feet, and just the smell of the blood is really what I like to note, because it kind of makes you feral almost, and it really just allows me to be unrestrained in the wrestling ring.
And as much as wrestling is sort of, there's this component of violence that's very clearly, a current through it, there's also this sort of mode of storytelling that's persistent throughout, and performance. And I'm curious how you see that, manifesting when you're in the ring. You've got this thing that you're working toward, but still it's so bodily, it's so physical. How do you maintain the plot, the through lines?
I like to use the comparison of Black Swan when I talk about deathmatch wrestling, because to me, when we were in the ring, me and Rena, during this match, it felt like everything was coming to this like crescendo, and we were just going and going and going and rising until you had that like moment of explosion. It's kind of like in the movie Black Swan, where she's doing the final scene and she runs up onto the platform and looks out into the audience and then falls onto the mattress bleeding. That's exactly what I felt like when I climbed up to the top rope and looked out at the audience and hit a moonsault onto Rena. And it was just like the release, the final giving it your all, and then just dying on the ground, where I don't know where that image is, but I'm sure it'll
Can we show the photo from the
come up.
Masha match?
Both of us just laying there after we had created
Yep, that's good.
what to me,
Let's start with that.
it was my greatest masterpiece. I think this match was my greatest masterpiece in my entire career.
Yeah, I mean, it's stunning. I, of course, kind of came to this as an outsider. I went to my first match with Adam in LA. And it was pretty stunning to sort of see both what happens in the ring and also how the audience is sort of complicit in the action. It really feels like a play. It feels like a theater stage. Nick, I'm curious how you enter this as a documentary photographer, how you get close to that action, how you kind of have endeared yourself to the community, etc.
I was a wrestling fan as a kid, like everyone else here, but I kind of got out of it when I was like 10, 11. I just stopped. And I was always like following it, but like I really got back into it in 2018. My friend invited me to something called a no-ring death match in Brooklyn.
And what does that mean?
It means it's a death match like you see right there, but there's no ring.
Okay.
It is, everyone is around them. It's kind of this controlled chaos.
It's usually in a bar or
Yeah.
a concert venue, and it technically, at least they purport it to be, it's performance art. It's unregulated.
Yes.
We can get into the weeds of that later if we need to.
Yeah. Here or there. That's how I got into it. My friend told me about this thing that was happening in Brooklyn, so I go to it. One of the subjects in the book was the first match, Joey Janela, and I fell in love. Again, I fell in love with shooting this, and immediately I was like, how do I do more of this? And I started going to local New York independents, which isn't really the best wrestling, to be quite honest. There's, in every art form, there's talent levels, and et cetera. But I started from the bottom, and in 2019, I was invited by a friend to go to a show called The Collective, which is hosted by Game Changer Wrestling, which is the company that I shot visitors of. I was not allowed to shoot ringside. I was yelled at multiple times at the show because I was told one thing, and then when I got there, like everything else happens in events, your access isn't really what they tell you. But I don't complain. I just roll with the punches, no pun intended. And from there, I kind of was in and out a little bit. I didn't do it too much, but 2020 is when it really came together, and that's when I started really like ingraining myself into the scene. And Death and Code was probably the biggest jump into that culture, because a lot of what I shoot is the in-between, I like to call it, like the preparation of seeing someone go into a space that they know they're gonna get cut, they know they're gonna get beat up a bit, and like seeing that like almost solitude that people have, like where they know like they're about to experience like a metaphorical car crash, but not even like it's kind of a car crash, is just a really interesting thing to document. And then seeing the aftermath, seeing that adrenaline dump, seeing the blood, is real. Like seeing the reactions after inhaling, 100 light tubes full of mercury, is just like a really, like that's the part of it where I'm like really drawn to be honest. I love the matches. I think the matches are poetic and art clearly, but it's the moments that people don't see is that really fascinates me.
Yeah, I mean, in the book and in the exhibition, you can kind of see the arc of the 3-day sort of event, from the beginning
Yeah.
to the middle to the end, from literally the airport to the audience.
Yeah, that was really important to me as a kind of publisher, co-curator, was that, like, I made sure Nick was on the plane with all the talent getting there. Like, I wanted them to see them in their, their bonnets sleeping, I want to see them smoking cigarettes, like, outside the airport. I wanted to show, like, the kind of the range of the experience, because for some of the folks who are on this trip, it was the first time they've ever been to Japan. For some of them, it's the first time they've ever left America, and for others, it was the first time going back to Japan and wrestling in like the biggest venue they'd had to date. So I wanted to show, like, kind of like illustrate the storytelling of like what that meant to the subjects of the book.
And can you say a little bit more about how this event came to be, how you were involved?
Sure. So, in addition to being a board member of NADA and owning a communications and marketing agency, I'm also the co-owner of Jersey Championship Wrestling, which is the sister promotion of Game Changer Wrestling. So when my business partner Brett told me that they had booked Korakuen Hall. So Korakuen Hall, if you go to Tokyo, is this building that's adjacent to Tokyo Dome City. Tokyo Dome is where the Tokyo Dome Giants play. It's also an amusement park, and they have like a lot of like kind of tourist focused or aimed restaurants like TGI Fridays and stuff like that. But within it, there's an office building, and within that office building, on I think the third floor, there's a venue called Korakuen Hall, which is about a 2,000 person capacity venue, specifically built to highlight wrestling, and I guess MMA and boxing to a lesser extent, but the majority of shows they get booked there are professional wrestling. There's probably like at least like 30 major and minor promotions in Japan that run this building on a regular basis, but never before had an independent US promotion been allowed to book a show under their own shingle, and Brett, my partner, had negotiated that. So it was a big deal, and it was risky too, because it was a foreign company coming in on their own, based just on kind of like things that we stream on the internet, and seeing like how big our fan base really was there. Brett had sold out Shinkiba First Ring, which is a similar building built specifically for professional wrestling, but it's really a shell in the docks of outer Tokyo, with about 200 people, 300 people, and this was like, the aim was to draw like four times as many for this. So it was a big undertaking. It was a historic moment for the company, for all of my friends, and I thought it'd be an interesting kind of way to tell the story of kind of who these folks are and what the art form is all about.
Yeah, and Nick, of course, was along for the ride. I'm curious how you dealt with that level of action and knowing, the history of the space, the history of the eventing and whatnot. Was it intimidating? How did you just go forth and conquer? What was it like?
The language barrier and the culture barrier was definitely something very different than most United States independent shows.
They love the rules over there.
They love the rules.
And we hate the rules, so there was a lot of problems.
For example, just a small story. Adam was trying to accommodate a guest that he had, and he was trying to add one seat to ringside, which is wide open. You can add, if you really wanted to, you could have added 20 more seats to ring, so to the first row. But to add one was this massive undertaking, apparently.
Yeah, because there was one seat that I moved.
Microphone.
Yeah, there's one seat that I moved and had one person, but I got permission from the co-promoter to do so. They said yes. But then there's about 40 conversations with the floor staff looking at the floor plan and looking at this like one extra seat and just like having an existential crisis about the fact that it was there. And I'm like, man, this is not very efficient. This is like why the end's in the toilet right.
So there's two major differences with shooting ringside at independent wrestling versus in U.S. versus Japan. One is in America you don't cross hard cam being the camera that is just focused on the ring. You don't go in front of that. It makes sense. You don't want to be in the way of a live production. Japan, they don't care about that. You can go cross hard cam as long as you can get your shots. The other part is they want you kneeling, which is not a thing really in American independence, especially when there's no barricade. And at one point, the co-promoter, I don't know if you know this, was kept pushing me down in the corner, going duck, and I'm like, this is not your show. Please stop kicking me. Sasaki kept kicking me in the knee in order for me to get low. And I'm like, I'm 5'6", I'm not a big person. They can see above me. And also this ring is 20 feet big. And I'm the only one on this side. And I'm stuck to a turnbuckle. Please don't kick me in the knee. This really hurts. And I'm trying to do my job.
Wait, what was the question, Reilly?
I lost the plot. Yeah.
We were talking about the different, we were just talking about,
Cultural differences.
yeah.
I mean, more than anything, just, you know.
Yeah. Also, shooting backstage the way I do, as intimate it is, isn't really like, this is pretty new, I think, in wrestling, in terms of the level of access, because there is the world of kayfabe, which is the world of wrestling, and a lot of my photos break that world, or break that mold.
Wait, do you guys know what kayfabe means?
No, explain, please.
Kayfabe's carny. It is.
Yeah, I know.
Carny for fake.
Yeah.
Right? So kayfabe is kind of like the idea of like putting on airs and that everyone like kind of suspends disbelief. So like Masha's kayfabe name is Masha. That's not Masha's name. We're not gonna tell you what her name is. Or like, you know, one person being a better wrestler than the other one because they beat them, you know, in a match that was scripted. Like that's, you know, that notion is like adhering to kayfabe. Is there a better way to describe it, I guess? Like,
No, I think that's pretty good.
It's like, it's just like, you know, keeping, like in carny culture, it's like keeping the secrets away from the marks, basically, you know, is the idea of kayfabe. And it's something that can be applied to a lot of things. I think a lot of like kind of reductive cultural journalists did a lot of Donald Trump, like Donald Trump is this kayfabe, like, you know, kind of stories that came out because he was on wrestling like, multiple times.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway.
But a lot of my photos break that barrier, which is, again, like more of a newer thing with the internet and everything. And again, I don't think like 5-10 years ago this book could have been made, especially in Japan, because they are very heavy into keeping everything backstage within backstage. And I want to break that a little bit. I want to show the performance aspect of wrestling. I want to show how, I want to show the adrenaline dumps. I want to show everything. I want to show how like the matches are made. And like in the book, there's a spot you can see where they're practicing the spot beforehand. Like I don't think that would
Yeah, so if you look at the book, this photo actually that's
the
screen
photo
right
yeah.
now. There's a double page spread in the book where there's this scene, which is from the show, and is in the exhibition, but to the left of it is actually a shot of them practicing this before the show, in street clothes. So,
which again would never be shown like 5-10 years ago. I really feel like,
or wouldn't be allowed. Like,
yeah.
they would see the bricks, basically.
But I think that's the brunt of that. Yeah.
And how many images roughly did you end up with that you had to?
Too many.
Yeah.
Way too many. I don't. Like finals or like how many?
Before the process.
Before the edit, Jesus. Well, here's the thing: is that it's action. So like I shoot burst mode when it comes to action, and I probably get 3,500 cards. So times that by 3. What is that about? Like 10,000 or 11,000 images, which is.
The book's like 200.
It book's a little bit more than 200.
Yeah, and we could do probably 3 more books if we wanted with what we.
Yeah, I have a lot more that didn't make the book, but from the 10,000, I probably cut down to about 800, like solid. Like,
And how many formats did you shoot while you were on tour?
4. I did a couple that has not even been seen because I haven't got developed yet because they were shot on point and shoots, the disposable cameras, because I love those, because you get a different reaction from people if you shove a DSLR in their face versus a disposable camera. You get more candid moments. I did Handycam, which is in the gallery. The entire video is looped on a TV there, and 2 different digital cameras. I had like a walk-around camera in my regular gear.
What I like too about it is that it feels like there's not a sort of like linear storyline. Like a lot of the action was interpolated between like images of the crowd or playing or in the ring. Pivoting slightly, I'm curious what your experience was during this whole sort of eventing process and how, again, it was different for you being in Japan, competing, etc.
Well, I actually began my career over in Japan, so every time that I go back to Japan, it feels like I'm coming home. And I actually spent all of 2020 living there during the pandemic because I simply refused to leave. I knew good and well that if I came back here, I was going to go straight to jail for breaking into a gym. So I stayed there and lived in a dojo and trained. So during this time, I was actually meant to wrestle at Korakuen Hall, but somebody gets COVID, some other issue happens, and long story short, I was prevented from wrestling at this venue maybe like 5 or 6 times throughout my entire career. And then on this tour, I knew that I was going to be wrestling there, and then I actually was told that we were going to be the main event, which I did not know, and Nick here managed to capture that moment on camera. And it was extremely special to me to finally get to wrestle in like this historic, amazing, famous venue that I had been dying to wrestle in my entire life. But then to do that in the main event on a show that was, breaking history because an American company had never run Korakuen Hall on its own. So it was history on top of history, and now there's 2 women main eventing in a death match. Like, it just couldn't get any more big, high stakes that moment. And I really do believe that everything in life happens at a divine timing. So I think that I was meant to have to keep going through trials and tribulations up until this moment where me and Rena could finally tell our story. And we mentioned earlier telling the story and making the crowd feel. And it was so beautiful for me to see the audience. There was women crying after the match because they were so inspired and they had never seen that level of violence in Japan from 2 women main eventing a show. So I hold this experience and this tour to Japan very near and dear to my heart, not only because of what we were able to do in the ring and everything that it means to me, but also because I was able to do it alongside my friends. Because during the pandemic, I spent so much time in Japan alone by myself with no one who spoke English at all. So to finally be in Tokyo doing what I love, making history with people who I love and love me back, was beautiful.
I think on top of that though, like that Saturday before we got to Japan, you wrestled. The Sunday out before Japan, you wrestled. We flew in Monday. We got in Tuesday in Japan, immediately landed, went straight to Shinkiba first ring. You had a match there. You opened the card.
The first match, yeah.
Yeah. The next day you had the match. Then the day after, you main evented Korakuen Hall. And then you flew out the next day to go to LA to wrestle again. And then I think you wrestled on Saturday and Sunday as well. Which is just, it's 7 matches in 7 days in 2 different continents.
Flying internationally, bleeding out.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
And not to mention that you also had to go after Takeda and Jun Katsai, who are 2 of the most decorated deathmatch wrestlers in the world, and you're main eventing that card. I think that like speaks for how momentous that was, like how grandiose that was.
Yeah. And so speaking of something that Masha said, even though like some of the promoters we worked with and some of the ushers were kind of dicks in Japan, the thing that was really beautiful in terms of like this kind of push and pull around the rules is that the fans who showed up, were all Japanese fans, actually really made it a point to act like they were fans of the promotion, which included breaking taboos as an audience member in Japan. Like, you're not supposed to stand up. If you're in the crowd at a Japanese show, you'll be actively yelled at by the promotion security, like, sit down. They all stood up as soon as the show started and chanted GCW, GCW, GCW. And what was relevant about that also was that prior to this show, on all the other tours that Brett and the crew had done in Japan prior to running Korakuen, it was still technically COVID era. It was like, COVID was under control in Japan, so people could fly and do shows, but the audience was not allowed to open their mouth. They could only respond to the show by clapping. So the auditory response, typically, that is incorporated into a wrestling match, was pretty muted. Like, it was like a different kind of, match and a different, challenge for the workers. This was the first time post-pandemic that the audience was also allowed to make noise. So all those confluence of things made for a really special moment.
And going into it, of course, you knew that this was going to be a book, and you planned that this was going to become something larger than just the 3-day event, which is now sort of manifest in the pages. But in presenting these works in an exhibition context, you were mentioning, Nick, that it was important to see them removed from a screen and to really be present with the images. And it's the first time that you've exhibited images in this way. It was exciting to work together on that. I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to that process, what it was like to sort of see that happen.
As an event photographer, timelines are very important, and especially in the day of social media. And I really, besides the zine we did, I don't print out a lot of my work. It just never worked out that way. There was one time in the pandemic I sold a print for bail funds and made about $10,000 for bail funds during the Black Lives Matter protests. But other than that, I don't even actually print my own work on that. Funny enough.
I have that one.
Oh, do you? He has one. I don't. But all my photos have been seen through basically a cell phone, and it's been very hard to wrap my mind around. I don't consider myself an artist, but I guess I am in this way where I'm just I don't want my photos to be seen on a cell phone anymore. I'm fed up with it. It's not how I like my work to be shown, and this is the medium where it's been my photos are the biggest they've ever been in this, and I think I cried twice looking at that because it's something. It's how I think photos need to be displayed nowadays, or should be displayed. I'm just really over Instagram and all of that jazz for exhibiting your photos. Just not a fun way to see it. I don't think it shows the full story.
Yeah. Well, too, you get to see the viewer's reaction. And
For sure.
It's interesting to have those two separate opening receptions, because Sunday night, there was one that was really centered around the wrestling sort of community, which is really its own sort of unit. And I had no context for that, so I was walking around these big men who were just... And then Tuesday was, of course, sort of a more art world sort of centered opening, and that a little more my speed. But nevertheless, it's really interesting, even before we started this talk, to hear you two sort of going on about different sort of aspects of the community that is really insular in a way. And again, by displaying the images, you're sort of releasing a little bit of that into a public setting.
I loved seeing the art world's reaction to everything as well, because a lot of this is just violent. Clearly, the photo of Masha, lying down with broken glass all around, and seeing people's reaction to that, that do not expect that, is kind of awesome, to be real.
I had clients come up to me and be like, I like the pageantry. but violence not so much. It was just like,
But that's part of the story. I think, but that's why I love wrestling, is that it combines the pageantry, it combines the improv, it combines the performance aspect of it, and the sport of wrestling into this grandiose performance. And I think that's what makes me really drawn into professional wrestling.
and besides improv, which I can't really deal with personally, this is like the only performance art where the performance really actively changes based on the auditory response of the crowd. You know, I think that's really unique to pro wrestling, in which, you know, the plans change based on how the audience reacts. I mean, Masha, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I like how you mentioned earlier that the crowd in Japan for this tour was a lot more lively than they normally are, because even when I wrestled in Japan pre-COVID, they're still extremely like respectful and bound by the rules as opposed to wrestling anywhere else in the world. You know, like Adam mentioned, during the pandemic, they would only stomp their feet and clap as a way to like yay and boo things. But even before the pandemic, it would just be dead silence, and they would be observing, and then they would clap, and you basically have to like impress them for them to give you any kind of reaction, as opposed to in America, they're all like drunk and jumping out of their chairs, and they're like, yeah, you know, that sucks, or like, that rules. But oh, you laughed and I forgot the question. Somebody asked me something.
I was just talking about like what it's like to have to adapt to the audience reactions.
Right, yeah, so, you know, sometimes in the middle of a match, the fans will either get behind like the good guy and the bad guy, but sometimes you go out there and you've accidentally assigned the wrong role to the wrong person. That happens to me quite a bit because, you know, I just go out there and, for lack of a better way to describe it, I just beat the shit out of people. And sometimes instead of booing me, they're like, hell yeah, hit them harder, beat them up, and then we'll have to like switch the story. So I feel like that's extremely different, because I don't think anyone in Broadway is gonna go and change their scenes just because the audience isn't reacting to it. But that's very much something that we do in wrestling, because if you try to force something on the fans that they don't want, they're not gonna accept it, and it's just gonna go poorly. So you really have to go out there and adapt to your audience at times, but also to prevent that from happening, you have to really have a lot of forethought about what kind of wrestling you're putting out to what kind of audience. So I try to tailor the wrestling story that I'm gonna tell every time with a different person to that specific crowd.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've only been to one match, but having seen the sort of like pandemonium from, also there's like exaggerated noises, like they have like speakers underneath the like platform. It's like really like
The rings are often like, it's not always, but yeah.
that's what I'm
Yeah.
bearing witness to. But in the fanfare, the energy, it's like really visceral. It's like a 360 sort of like dimensional experience. And again, when you kind of commit that to an image, reduce is a strong word, but you kind of like pluck an element out of that experience. And so in deciding to take these images, is there like an impulse that you see happening? Like, is there something that's like compelling you as you're seeing the footage, or something that you know, like this angle with that shot, you know, would make sense?
I look for like little like cues, like I guess a lot of wrestling is exaggerated for, you know, audience. Like I'll look like when, for example, person's down, they're selling meaning they got hurt in the wrestling match.
They're acting hurt.
They're acting hurt, yes. Thank you, Kagan. The person attacking them is like waiting for them to get up. That look, that intensity is like something I strive for. I try to look for, like, of course there's the action shots. Of course there's, you know, what shot doesn't look good when there's exploding glass on someone's head. Like, of course that's gonna look good, but I try to look for, like, again, the moments in between, the loud action, and then you try to get the loud, like, try to get that boisterous.
And also as people who are kind of adjacent to the ring, like I'm not a wrestler, but I watch a lot of wrestling because I promote shows, and Nick observes a lot because he's shooting them. You kind of begin to understand the cadence of all the matches, and also what wrestlers do what at what point, and then what's a common thing that's going to happen if like this reversal happens. Like, so, you know, with foresight, you can also kind of anticipate what's about to happen if you've watched it enough. So I think that probably plays into your,
Oh, for sure.
you know, you're like, oh, he's about to hit this spot, because I've seen this spot before.
Yeah, there's a wrestler named Mike Bailey who, he's gotten me a couple times, and now I realize his cadence is a little bit more.
Yeah.
But there's been several times where he does this move where he runs up the turnbuckle, and then he moonsaults from inside the ring, backflip,
Yeah.
outside onto the opponent from the outside. And in a multi-man match, you don't see it coming because you think he's about to do something else. And there's been several times where I've almost gotten kicked in the face really hard because you don't know what's.
Yeah, 'cause he's trying to misdirect fans. Too.
Yeah. So when you get me, when I've seen a lot of wrestling matches up close, and you can kind of like, you know, realize the patterns a little bit. When you get me and you get me on my toes like that, that's how you know they break the rhythm. And I think that's an interesting aspect of that. I don't know. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I think to sort of bring it back into the setting we're in currently, which is not we have Adam, who, you know, works between art and, of course, his interests in wrestling. So I'm curious to you spoke a little bit about Orange Crush. I don't know, do you have anything else to add about how you see wrestling and art sort of becoming one or intertwined?
Well, one bit of context that you guys should know is that at the same time I was shooting this book, A24 was also on tour with us at the same time, shooting a feature documentary about these guys and deathmatch wrestling in general. So a movie with a lot of imagery that looks like this should be out probably next year. So I think there's something also, you know, just generally about wrestling and popular culture is that in terms of just like pure numbers, like it is popular. Like wrestling is the #1 watched show on most weeks on cable television, if cable, you know, people care about that anymore in the age of streaming. Like Dark Side of the Ring, which is basically like Unsolved Mysteries, but with a wrestling twist, is the only television show that Vice, which is basically like a, you know, zombie company at this point, finances, and, you know, it's the #1 rated show in the history of their network. It's just like, I think these different, and, you know, A24 also put out the movie about Von Erichs this past year, which was actually very financially successful and popular during the holiday season. Like, there's so many interesting stories out there that are tangential to actually, like, wrestling as like a you know, kind of fake sports product, like just like the narratives that come out of it, movies about it, documentaries about it, because it's so visually compelling. That I think we're going to continue to see that in different ways, especially as there's more emphasis put on in the entertainment economy around like subcultures and like fan service to like, you know, smaller groups of people who are willing to spend a lot of money to support something. I mean, that's the way things are going right now, just in general across the board. So I foresee that to continue in terms of like crossover with visual art. I think through this experience, it's become apparent to me that like most people in the visual art world are not comfortable with the level of violence. So there'll always be like a barrier to entry in that way, but you know, there's also like her niche and shit like that too that people are into. So there's gonna be crossover, you know, undoubtedly, but it's not for everybody.
Yeah. You have something to add as well?
I mean, you mentioned a bunch of movies. I mean, you mentioned Black Swan before, and like didn't Aronofsky make The Wrestler?
Yeah, I'm in that. With him.
Oh.
We're extras in the movie.
Oh,
And
wow.
then on top of that, Merle, you mentioned her before. Merle, I can't think of the name.
Oh.
Walton Goggins is getting an upcoming movie.
Oh, Mildred Burke.
Mildred Brooke, I think that's what it was. They're doing a documentary on her, so like.
That was a feature film.
Oh, that's what it
Mildred
was,
Burke,
yeah.
yeah.
Which is wild to think about.
And Cassandra, who was the first Exotica, or like the most famous Exotica, which is basically, you know, Mexican wrestlers that have an entire division where they work in drag, essentially, has a feature with Gabriel Garcia Bernal on Amazon, with Bad Bunny, like, all these wrestling stories are being optioned right now.
Yeah. So I also, again, like visual, what I said before, not all art is supposed to make you feel comfortable, and I think visual art is very much tied into that. So.
I totally agree. Yeah. Well, with our last few minutes, I think it's time to turn to the audience and see if we have any questions.
This is not so much a question, but a piggybacking notion.
This is what we love at Q&As, not questions.
But I'm sure you'll say in response to it. The idea for the non-wrestling initiated, you guys have mentioned a couple times about the level of violence that people are not comfortable with it. Well, neither are a lot of wrestling fans, like actual wrestling fans, like mainstream wrestling fans are not themselves comfortable with this. It gets a little bit, you said it gets a lot of, what's the term?
Concern trolls?
Concern trolls.
Yeah.
So I mean, so that I think that in and of itself is pretty like fascinating. It shows you how far down the rabbit hole you are. But as a result, I think it's a realer, vein, pun intended.
Masha's a grown-up, they can fuck off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But anyway, not a question. Sorry.
Any questions?
Yeah, thank you guys. Do you guys have any thoughts on like I don't know if you want to call it unexpected rise of all elite wrestling, and like the owner is also the owner of the Jags. So like, were there like network effects of like an existing sports organization under the auspices of a billionaire? And like, how is that, and it's only been 5 or 6 years maybe? So how does that, how has that affected the landscape? Like the emergence all of a sudden of this very prominent promotion?
I can speak to that, but Masha, maybe you should take that first, because I would imagine some of the immediate effects are economic, right?
Very much so. I was actually speaking about this earlier today in a school on the Upper West Side for Career Day, but I was saying that the existence of All Elite Wrestling really gave a lot of wrestlers more opportunity to make more money in this sport that we're so passionate about. But up until very recently, you were either in the WWE making money or you were doing this as a hobby. And there really was no in between, because some of the most famous wrestlers who we all look up to and study were getting paid like $80 or $100 to do stuff like this, or like stuff on ROH or whatever it was in the early 2000s. So All Elite really gave a lot of independent wrestlers a place to go where they could shine their craft to a lot more people worldwide and get paid a livable wage so that we can make this our careers full time.
Yeah, and it created competition in that sense. So now, like WWE has to actually think about how they make their offer to major talent more appealing. So instead of being like, yeah, if we sign you, no matter what, you have to work 300 days a year and have no vacation, never see your family again. While like another company now that has TV like once a week, I'm like, oh, I can go there, make similar money, and see my family. So like I think competition is good for the workers, creates better working conditions. For me, that's like, the takeaway in terms of the landscape. There's a lot more nuanced stuff in terms of like TV rights deals and how all that works, and the economy about what's going to happen, and we still don't know to some extent. We know with WWE, like they just got $1 billion from Netflix for a 5-year deal. So like, there's definitely sports and sports adjacent stuff, like wrestling, definitely is the only thing that there are competitive bidding wars amongst networks for right now in terms of like rights fees. Every other streamer is just like figuring out ways to screw up with, they were for a long time, screw up with unions and not pay people and like, give them appearing credits or supporting credits and things like that, as opposed to like starring credits. So I don't know, I think the future is bright for wrestling. Also, the thing about wrestling is too, like forever, because people are so passionate about wrestling, they're willing to do it for less and not kind of ask as many questions, but with competition, now they have options, they have leverage. So I think ultimately that's the net benefit.
A bunch of my friends have jobs. It's really nice.
Yeah.
They have health insurance. That sounds really nice. It's shooting what they love. So competition's good.
You mean on the photography side?
Oh, all of it. But yeah, even photography side, like 3 of my best friends work at AEW. Like that's awesome. Like they wouldn't have a job, like full-time job shooting wrestling. That's not, like, shooting the independents is not a viable career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? from
Yeah,
audience?
just one follow-up one, it's a little unrelated. Did like WWE ever have non-competes for their wrestlers?
Yes.
Yeah.
And now, I say that because the Federal Trade Commission this past week just banned put a ban on non-compete, so does that affect?
Yeah, but the thing to understand about WWE and AEW wrestlers both is that they're technically independent contractors, and if they have a non-compete, they're being paid through their non-compete period usually. It's not like salaried employees in New York, which a lot of my rivals in the PR agency world try to do. It's where I'm going to pay you, until you leave, or I fire you, but you can't go to another agency. I'm not going to pay you anymore. That's always been kind of like illegal, but people didn't have the funds or the means to actually litigate it, so it was a bit onerous. In wrestling, WWE definitely doesn't necessarily always have the most ethical business practices, but they did pay people through their non-competes. So I think that's going to be less of an issue than it was before, and I imagine if you agree to get paid to not work, I don't think that's going to be banned as a result of this federal law. Right? That's accurate, based on what you know, right? Yeah. You. Riley will.
Yes, that seems to be accurate.
Yeah.
Well, any other questions?
About labor?
Yeah. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming, and especially the panelists. It's been great working together on the show. Congratulations again on the book. And
Thank you, Riley.
Thank you. Thank you very much.